who decided what version of history we're taught. Every civilization has its rulers, and those rulers have the power to control information. When you dig deep into history, you'll notice that a lot of what we know is curated, selected and filtered to fit a particular narrative. We tend to think history is just facts, but it's way more than that. It's a story, and the people in power decide how that story gets told. Let's start with the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD. This was a massive turning point for what would eventually become modern Christianity. You've probably heard the basics. A group of bishops, under the command of the Roman Emperor Constantine, gathered to settle some theological disputes. But what they were really doing was deciding what books would go into the Bible and, more importantly, which ones would be excluded. Texts like the Book of Enoch, the Gospel of Thomas, and a bunch of other apocryphal writings were deliberately left out. Why? Because they didn't fit the narrative the church wanted to promote. They were deemed too controversial, too dangerous, or just plain inconvenient. Who gave them the authority to decide what counts as sacred scripture and what doesn't? Why were the voices of certain texts silenced? It's because the early church wasn't just about religion, it was about control. By choosing which texts to include, the church could guide the beliefs of millions of people, and in turn, control how they viewed the world. That's how powerful controlling the narrative can be. This didn't just happen in religious texts. It happened with ancient history too. Take Egyptology, for example. For years, mainstream archaeologists dismissed any suggestion that the pyramids or the Sphinx could be older than we thought. They stuck with the conventional timeline. The pyramids were built around 2500 BC, period. But then you have evidence, like water erosion on the Sphinx, that suggests it could be way older. Scholars like Robert Schoch have argued that the Sphinx may date back to 10,000 or earlier, but those ideas were ridiculed for decades. Why? Because admitting the pyramids or the Sphinx could be older would flip the established history upside down, and people don't like that. Institutions have a vested interest in keeping the timeline as is. If you control history, you control people's understanding of their origins. And it's not just ancient civilizations. Fast forward to modern history, and we see the same thing happening. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, colonial powers manipulated the narrative to fit their agenda. They dismissed or outright destroyed evidence of advanced African, Asian, and American civilizations to justify their domination. If the narrative is that these cultures were primitive or inferior, then it's easier to justify colonization. They didn't want people knowing about the grandeur of places like Great Zimbabwe or the advanced Inca. Instead, they erased or downplayed these achievements to maintain their own supremacy. This pattern repeats itself over and over again. The people in power decide what gets preserved and what gets erased. Ever wonder why some of the world's greatest libraries and records were burned down throughout history? Think of the Library of Alexandria, a treasure trove of ancient knowledge, wiped out. Or the burning of Mayan codices by Spanish conquerors. Why destroy knowledge? Because knowledge is power, and if you can erase the past, you can shape the future. And it's not like this is ancient history. It still happens today. Governments and institutions regularly manipulate the public narrative to fit their agenda. How many classified documents do you think are hidden away in vaults, never to see the light of day, because they don't fit the official version of events? This isn't a conspiracy theory. This is just how power works. Take the UFO phenomenon as an example. For decades, people who reported sightings were dismissed as crazy, and official reports were buried. But in recent years, we've seen the US government slowly admit that they've been studying UFOs, or UAPs, as they're now calling them, for a long time. Why the sudden change? Because controlling the narrative for as long as possible kept people in the dark. Now that it's harder to deny, they're slowly feeding us information, but only on their terms. The history we're taught is not some neutral recounting of facts. It's a crafted story, one that's been shaped by those in power. So when you're thinking about our origins, about where we came from, and what's been hidden from us, don't just accept the official version. Dig deeper. Ask yourself, who benefits from the version of history we've been given, and what are they not telling us? All right, buckle up, because this is where things get wild. We've all been fed the same story, right? That human beings evolved on Earth, naturally, over millions of years, just like every other species. But what if that's not the whole picture? What if humans didn't evolve here by chance? What if our origins are far more deliberate? Here's a theory that's going to shake things up. We were created by extraterrestrials. Yeah, aliens. Now, before you roll your eyes, think about this. Ancient texts from all over the world talk about gods descending from the sky. Look at the Sumerians, one of the earliest civilizations known to humankind. They had these gods called the Anunnaki, powerful beings who, according to their stories, came to Earth, mingled with humans, and bam, here we are. But are these gods just mythological figures, or were they extraterrestrial visitors? Take a look at the pyramids of Giza. For thousands of years, people have wondered, how the hell did ancient Egyptians move those massive stones without modern machinery? The sheer precision with which they were built is mind-blowing. Mainstream historians will say, it's all hard work and engineering. But the truth, we still can't replicate it today. Some theorists suggest the pyramids might have been built using technology way beyond our comprehension, possibly gifted by beings not of this world. Not only that, but their alignment with the stars, way too precise to be coincidence. Coincidence only goes so far, right? Then there's Stonehenge, another mind-bending mystery. Massive stones perfectly placed with astronomical precision. Did ancient humans have the math, the tools, the knowledge? Or did someone, something, teach them? And let's not forget about the Nazca line in Peru. Giant drawings etched into the ground that can only be appreciated from above. Back in the day, there were no airplanes. So why would ancient people create these? Who were they trying to communicate with? It sure seems like those designs were meant to be seen from the sky. But here's the kicker. This theory isn't just about architecture or art. It goes deeper. What if these beings didn't just influence us from the outside, but literally created us? What if they tinkered with our DNA, shaping humans into what we are today? There's something called the missing link in evolution. Scientists can't fully explain how Homo sapiens suddenly appeared with advanced cognitive abilities, culture, and society. We just kind of popped up. Was there an evolutionary leap, or did something intervene? Some researchers believe we were genetically modified by advanced extraterrestrials, hybridized, if you will, with some kind of cosmic DNA. It's the ancient astronaut theory, and it's a real possibility. Now look at the Bible and other religious texts. The idea of a supreme being creating humans. Sound familiar? What if God isn't a singular deity, but rather a group of advanced extraterrestrial beings who engineered life on Earth? It would explain why so many ancient cultures have similar stories of creation involving beings from the sky. And we're not just talking about random theories. There are real scientists like Dr. Francis Crick, co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, who suggested that life on Earth could have been deliberately seeded by an advanced civilization. He called it directed panspermia. I'm not saying you should take this as gospel, but doesn't that at least make you question what we've been taught? Some experts argue that even our genetic code could hold clues. It's been suggested that there are sequences in human DNA that don't look like they belong here, almost like a biological signature of intervention. Is our DNA carrying a message from our creators? And if so, why are we only now starting to figure it out? Ancient cultures knew something that we've forgotten. They had an understanding of the cosmos that went beyond their time. They knew there was more to life than what we see in front of us. So were we really the first intelligent beings on Earth? Or did someone or something give us a little push? We all know the story, Adam and Eve, the first humans, created by God, hanging out in the Garden of Eden, until that whole Apple incident changed everything. That's the narrative we've been fed for centuries. But is it the full story? Or is it just a heavily edited version of what really happened? Here's where things get interesting. What if Adam and Eve weren't actually the first humans? What if there were others before them? Let's dive into some ancient texts that most people have never even heard of. The Bible gives us one version of human origins. But did you know there are other books that were deliberately left out of the Bible? Books like the Book of Enoch and the Book of Jubilees. These books paint a much more complicated picture of humanity's beginning. In the Book of Enoch, for example, we're introduced to a group of beings called the Watchers. Angelic beings who descended to Earth, saw human women, and, well, decided to mix things up. They had children with these women, creating a race of giants known as the Nephilim. This wasn't just some minor detail, it was a huge deal. The Nephilim were said to be powerful, godlike beings that roamed the earth. So, if you're wondering where this fits in with the Adam and Eve story, you're not alone. In some interpretations, the Nephilim existed before Adam and Eve. That's right, there could have been entire populations of pre-Adamic humans, or human-like beings, on Earth before the whole Eden drama. The Book of Jubilees even suggests that Eve wasn't the first woman. There are whispers in ancient lore about Lilith, a rebellious figure who, according to some traditions, was Adam's first companion. But unlike Eve, Lilith refused to submit, walked away from Eden, and, wait for it, started her own thing elsewhere. This opens up a whole new layer of possibilities. If Lilith or others like her existed before Eve, then Adam and Eve aren't the first of anything. They're just part of a much bigger story, a chapter that was carefully selected to fit a narrative. So why aren't we taught about these other figures? Why don't we hear about the pre-Adamic races? Because they don't fit the neat, tidy story that mainstream religions want us to believe. The official narrative says humans are special, created by God as the pinnacle of creation, and everything before that was chaos. But what if humanity's origins are actually far messier? What if there were advanced beings living on Earth long before Adam and Eve, and their stories were scrubbed from history to maintain control? If you think about it, the existence of pre-Adamic beings could explain a lot of the weird stuff we find in history. Take the Sumerians, one of the oldest known civilizations, who seemed to just appear out of nowhere with advanced knowledge of writing, astronomy, and law. They had gods, yes, but these gods behaved more like rulers, alien rulers even, if you connect the dots from our last discussion. And don't forget the ancient Egyptian mythologies, where gods and goddesses walked among humans and interbred with them. This sounds eerily similar to the Nephilim and Watchers we talked about earlier. Could it be that Adam and Eve weren't even close to being the first humans, but rather part of a later chapter in a long hidden history of Earth? Adam and Eve's story could have been manufactured to erase the memory of those who came before. Think about it. If you're trying to control the narrative, wouldn't it make sense to start fresh? Wipe out any mention of other beings or civilizations and present one single, as it were, clean-cut story where humans start in a garden, make a mistake, and are punished. That's a lot easier to control than a history full of giants, angels, and forgotten civilizations. But if we dig deeper, the cracks in the official story become obvious. The Genesis account itself has two different creation stories. In one, man and woman are created simultaneously, and in another, Eve is made from Adam's rib. Why two different versions? And why were they allowed to exist side by side? Is this a leftover from an even earlier story, one that the editors couldn't completely erase? Let's not pretend that all these missing books and alternative traditions don't matter. They absolutely do. They provide clues to a much larger, much more complicated origin story for humanity. If Adam and Eve weren't the first humans, then what does that say about everything that's been built on top of that story? It shakes the foundation of everything we think we know. Pre-Adamic civilizations, alternate human origins, even the possibility that other beings shared this planet with us long before recorded history. Now, let's dive into something that mainstream science doesn't like to talk about: our DNA. We all grew up hearing the same thing: humans evolved from apes. And that's it. End of story. But what if the story isn't that simple? And I'm not talking about natural evolution here. I'm talking about genetic engineering. You see, when scientists look at the human genome, they find some weird stuff. There's this concept called the missing link. Basically, a gap in the fossil record that doesn't quite explain how we jumped from primitive hominids to modern humans with advanced thinking, language, and creativity. It's as if, at some point, something or someone tinkered with our genetics. Maybe we didn't evolve entirely on our own. Maybe we were engineered. Let's start with Neanderthals. For a long time, scientists thought that Neanderthals were a completely separate species that just died out. But then they looked deeper into our DNA and discovered something shocking. Modern humans carry Neanderthal genes. That means at some point, our ancestors and Neanderthals interbred, creating hybrid offspring. But it doesn't stop there. New research shows that not only did humans interbreed with Neanderthals, but we also have traces of DNA from another mysterious group called the Denisovans, a species we barely even know anything about. Their remains were discovered in a cave in Siberia, and DNA testing revealed that some modern humans, particularly those from Asia and Oceania, carry Denisovan genes. And that raises a massive question: how many other species have we mixed with? What if humans are actually the result of a hybrid experiment that happened thousands of years ago, with multiple hominid species contributing to the final product? Here's where things get even crazier. Some researchers believe that these genetic experiments weren't entirely natural. They argue that extraterrestrials might have played a role in upgrading early humans. The evidence: there are segments of human DNA that appear to have been intentionally altered. In other words, someone or something spliced into our genetic code at some point. This is what we call a genetic modification event, and it's not as far-fetched as it sounds. Take Dr. Francis Crick, the guy who discovered the double helix structure of DNA. He speculated that life on Earth, including humans, might have been seeded by an advanced extraterrestrial civilization. He wasn't just throwing ideas out there. He genuinely believed that life as we know it could have been engineered by intelligent beings. He even suggested that certain anomalies in our DNA could point to artificial origins. Think about that. The guy who literally discovered DNA believed we might be part of a grand cosmic experiment. And then there's the junk DNA problem. Scientists refer to parts of our genetic code as a junk DNA because they don't seem to have any obvious function. But is it really junk, or is it something we just don't understand yet? Some researchers suggest that what we call junk DNA might actually be encoded information, a kind of biological signature from our creators. And if that's true, it changes everything we know about our origins. Now, let's talk about evolution. Yes, Darwin's theory explains a lot, but there's one part that's always been a little sketchy: the sudden leap in human intelligence. One minute we're using stone tools, and the next we're creating art, building cities, and writing complex languages. It's almost as if a switch got flipped. Evolution isn't supposed to work that fast, and yet, here we are, conscious beings with technology that allows us to communicate across the planet, explore space, and even manipulate our own genetics. So what caused that leap? Was it natural selection, or did someone give us a push? Some believe that early humans encountered extraterrestrial visitors who passed on advanced knowledge, or even tweaked our DNA to speed up our development. It would explain why so many ancient cultures have myths of gods coming down from the sky, teaching humanity the secrets of the universe. These gods weren't just spiritual beings. They were flesh and blood, technologically advanced beings who altered the course of human evolution. Think about the Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations. Their creation myths describe gods descending from the heavens and creating humans to serve them. But these gods, the Anunnaki, didn't just create humans, they made us to be intelligent workers, capable of following orders and advancing civilization. Some theorists argue that this myth could actually be a distorted memory of an extraterrestrial intervention, a time when our creators upgraded us for their own purposes. And here's the thing. Modern science is catching up to these ancient ideas. With the discovery of CRISPR and other gene editing technologies, we know that it's possible to modify the DNA of living organisms. If we can do it now, why couldn't advanced civilization have done it tens of thousands of years ago? What if humans were created using technology similar to CRISPR, but on a level we can't even comprehend? It's time to talk about the ancient stories that don't make it into your average history textbook. We've been taught that mythology is just fiction, a way for ancient people to explain the world around them. But what if these stories are not just myths? What if they are actually fragmented memories of real events that were later distorted into legends? Think about it. Nearly every ancient culture has some kind of creation myth, where gods came down from the sky and played a direct role in human affairs. Are we really supposed to believe that all these different cultures came up with the same basic story by coincidence? Let's start with the Sumerians. They're often credited with being the first civilization, and their gods, the Anunnaki, were said to have descended from the heavens. But here's the thing. These gods didn't just create humans. They ruled over them, teaching them how to build cities, write laws, and understand the stars. These gods sound less like divine beings and more like advanced visitors, don't they? The Anunnaki were described as physical beings, not some intangible spiritual forces. Could it be that they were real entities who had a hand in guiding early human development? Now, let's take a look at the ancient Egyptians. Their mythology is packed with stories about gods like Ra, Osiris, and Horus, beings who weren't just worshipped, but interacted directly with humans. Ancient texts describe these gods walking among the people, teaching them advanced knowledge like architecture and astronomy. The pyramids themselves stand as a testament to this. How did ancient Egyptians, with their limited technology, build structures that we still can't fully explain today? Some researchers argue that Egyptian mythology might be more than just stories. It could be a historical record, distorted by time, of beings who came from the stars and imparted their wisdom. Ancient cultures all over the world, from the Greeks to the Mayans, talked about gods who came from the heavens. In ancient Greece, we hear about the Olympian gods like Zeus and Athena, who often meddled in human affairs. In the Mayan tradition, gods like Kukulkan were said to have come from the sky and brought with them knowledge of agriculture, mathematics, and timekeeping. These are cultures separated by thousands of miles, and yet they share the same core idea. Gods came from the sky, changed humanity, and then left. Why are we ignoring these consistent themes across civilizations? And let's not forget about the Bible. Even though it's been heavily edited over the centuries, it still contains hints of these same stories. In the book of Genesis, we hear about the Nephilim, giants who were the offspring of the sons of God and human women. These beings were said to be mighty and renowned, but their presence in the Bible raises some serious questions. Were the Nephilim just a myth, or were they the result of some kind of hybridization between humans and otherworldly beings? If you start to connect the dots between the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, and the gods of ancient cultures, a pattern begins to emerge. These stories could all be part of a larger, forgotten history of human civilization. Then there's the ancient Indian texts like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. These epic poems are filled with tales of gods, battles in the sky, and weapons that sound suspiciously like modern technology. Flying machines called Weimarners are described in great detail, and some of the weaponry sounds a lot like nuclear bombs. Are we really supposed to believe that this is all just metaphor? Or could these be descriptions of real events, battles between advanced beings using technology that ancient humans simply couldn't understand? Mainstream historians like to dismiss these stories as pure mythology, But when the same themes pop up across the globe, you have to start asking questions. Why do so many ancient cultures share the same idea of gods descending from the sky and altering the course of human history? Why are there so many stories of advanced beings teaching early humans how to build, write, and understand the stars? And why are we so quick to assume that these stories have no basis in reality? Here's the thing, the official story of human history is missing some huge chunks. We've been taught that civilization as we know it began around 6,000 years ago with places like Sumer and ancient Egypt. But what if that's just a tiny piece of the puzzle? What if advanced civilizations existed long before that, and their achievements have been buried literally and figuratively? There's plenty of evidence that suggests humanity's story is way older and more complex than what mainstream historians are willing to admit. Let's start with Göbekli Tepe, a site in Turkey that completely rewrote the timeline of civilization. Discovered in the 1990s, Göbekli Tepe is a massive stone complex built around 12,000 years ago. That's 7,000 years before Stonehenge or the pyramids. We're talking about giant stone pillars, intricately carved with animal motifs, all built by people who were supposed to be simple hunter-gatherers. How did they pull that off? The conventional narrative says organized civilization didn't exist until much later, but Göbekli Tepe blows that idea out of the water. And it wasn't just a fluke. This place was an active site for thousands of years before it was buried deliberately by its creators. Göbekli Tepe. Why would they go to such lengths to hide their own achievements? Then there's Pumapunku in Bolivia. This site is home to some of the most precise stonework ever seen, with massive blocks that look like they've been cut with lasers. The stones are so precisely carved that modern engineers struggle to explain how it was done. The mainstream explanation? Primitive people using stone tools somehow created these laser-like cuts. But come on, that doesn't add up. The stones at Pumapunku weigh hundreds of tons, and they fit together with microscopic precision. Who built this, and how? And just as important, when did they do it? The conventional timeline puts it around 500 AD, but many researchers believe it's much older, possibly by thousands of years. Speaking of timelines that don't fit, let's talk about Atlantis. Now, I know what you're thinking, Atlantis is just a myth, right? But what if it's not? The story comes from Plato, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, who claimed that Atlantis was a highly advanced civilization that existed around 9,000 years before his time, which puts it somewhere around 11,000 BC. Plato wasn't writing fantasy. He said he got the story from older sources. And here's the thing. Atlantis supposedly fell because of a massive cataclysm, a flood or earthquake that wiped out the entire civilization. Sound familiar? It lines up with what geologists call the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, a theory that suggests a comet hit the Earth around 12,000 years ago, causing a sudden cooling period and massive floods. Could this be what wiped out Atlantis and other advanced civilizations? Let's not forget about Nanmadol, an ancient city built on top of a coral reef in Micronesia. This place is constructed with enormous basalt blocks, some weighing up to 50 tons, stacked like giant bricks. The city itself is made up of artificial islands linked by canals, earning it the nickname the Venice of the Pacific. The thing is, no one knows exactly how the stones were moved or who built it. Mainstream archaeologists say it was built between 1180 and 1200 AD. But the oral traditions of the islanders say the city was built by supernatural beings long before that. Did an advanced civilization with knowledge of building techniques we still don't understand exist in the Pacific long before history tells us? And then there's Baalbek in Lebanon. The site contains the largest stone blocks ever used in construction, some weighing over 1,000 tons. They're so big that modern cranes would have a hard time moving them. Yet they're sitting in the foundation of a temple complex that's been standing for thousands of years. The Roman Empire gets credit for the temple, but those massive stone blocks, they predate the Romans by millennia. Who moved these stones, and why were they placed there? So why don't we hear about these places in history class? Because they don't fit the narrative. If civilizations like Göbekli Tepe, Pumapunku, and Baalbek existed long before the official beginning of history, it throws everything we think we know into chaos. Historians and archaeologists have spent centuries building a tidy story about human progress, but these sites don't fit. Acknowledging them means admitting that our ancestors were far more advanced, far earlier than we ever imagined. The truth is, these aren't isolated incidents. All over the world, there are anomalous sites, unexplained artifacts, and ancient structures that challenge the mainstream timeline. But instead of trying to explain them, many experts either ignore them or dismiss them as outliers. But these outliers are exactly what we should be paying attention to. They're clues that suggest lost civilizations once thrived on this planet, only to be wiped out by cataclysms or forgotten by time. All these clues, ancient texts, forgotten civilizations, unexplained structures, and hidden knowledge, they all point to one thing: humanity's story is not what we've been told. But the question is, why does this matter? Why should we care if there were civilizations before the ones we know? Or if ancient myths might actually be true? Here's why. Because knowing where we come from changes everything about where we're going. We've been living with a version of history that's been curated for us. From school textbooks to documentaries, we've been taught that humanity started small, evolved slowly, and only recently became capable of building great things. But what if we've been repeating cycles of greatness and destruction for millennia? What if our ancestors had technologies and knowledge that we've only just begun to rediscover? If we can grasp that there was a time when humanity was more advanced than we ever imagined, then the possibilities for our future are endless. Take a look at what's happening today. We've got the technology to explore space, manipulate genetics, and communicate instantly across the globe. But in the grand scheme of things, it feels like we're just scratching the surface. What if the answers to some of our biggest questions have already been figured out by past civilizations? Civilizations that knew things we're only now rediscovering. What if they left behind knowledge, tools, and structures meant for us to find, but we've ignored them because they didn't fit the tidy version of history we've been taught? This isn't just about history, it's about unlocking human potential. If we stop looking at ourselves as the peak of human achievement and start considering the possibility that we're part of a much older, much more advanced lineage, then we can start to push boundaries we never even knew existed. The truth about our past doesn't just help us understand who we are, it opens the door to who we can become. Think about it. What if ancient civilizations mastered technologies that could solve our modern problems, clean energy, sustainable living, or even space travel? What if we're rediscovering things like free energy, quantum physics, and advanced architecture that our ancestors once used to build societies far beyond what we've accomplished today? If we knew how they did it, we could leap forward as a species. But there's a reason this knowledge has been buried. Those in power have always had a vested interest in controlling the narrative. If we believe that we've always been primitive until now, then it's easier to keep us focused on the present, to make us think we're at the pinnacle of progress. But what happens when we break through that lie? When we start to question what's been hidden from us? When we realize that there's an entire history of human achievement, wisdom, and technology that we've barely tapped into? That's where we're headed. A new beginning. We're standing on the edge of a breakthrough, a time when we're rediscovering the ancient truths and using them to shape our future. It's up to us to be curious, to dig deeper, and to challenge the stories we've been told. The more we open our minds to the possibilities, the more we can unlock the potential of humanity. Thank you so much for watching and sticking with us through this journey. If you found this video thought-provoking, make sure to like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more content just like this. We really appreciate your time and your open mind. Together, we're uncovering the truth, piece by piece. God bless us all.